Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to this webinar. I will be handing over to Liz Strauss, who will be doing our introduction for the webinar. Over to you, Liz. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kumu. Good morning, everybody. I would really want to thank you for joining us with this webinar today. On behalf of the CEA and the TESD, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be part of this conversation. It's really exciting to see how many industry professionals are logging in to talk about a topic that is no longer in the future. It's already happening around us. The construction and engineering industry is changing fast. AI, automation, digital systems, and the whole fourth industrial revolution wave are reshaping how we build and recruit and train and plan our workforce. Some people are excited and some are nervous, and honestly, most of us are trying to figure out what this all means for our businesses and our people. That's exactly why today's webinar matters. This is not just another theory session. It's about practical insight into real workforce trends, your future skills, your labor implications, and how this industry can stay ahead of playing catch up late instead of playing catch up later. I honestly can't think of a better person to guide us through this conversation than John Botha, Joint CEO from Global Business Solutions. John has an incredible way of taking complex workforce and labor topics and make them practical, relevant, and thought-provoking for industry leaders. His experience and research in the future world of work make him one of the strongest voices in this space. John, thank you for partnering with the CEA and the TESD and for sharing your time and expertise with us today. We're really looking forward to this session. Questions can be directed into the chat box. Please do not go to the Q&A. Lock your questions in the chat box as we are going through the presentation. John will address it at the end of his presentation. His contact details, the recording and slides of this webinar will be shared with all members and attendees in the next 48 hours. So the members who were not able to join the live webinar will also have access to this. The recording will also be shared on the CEA and the TESD website for easy access. So I hand over to you, John. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. I was having a quick look at all the colleagues that have joined and some familiar faces or names rather, and then some others that are less familiar to me, but I'd love to get to know you better at some point. So very good morning. Colleagues, we're going to use this time productively. What I like doing is not just talking about things. I like to specifically demonstrate functionality. I'd like to demonstrate exactly how the world of work is changing. Of course, we all know about it. Everyone's talking about it. The question is, to what extent is your organization embracing these particular opportunities? If we see them as opportunities, of course, then we will find our way forward. But if we become paralyzed in this process, then clearly we're going to be a casualty of change. So I'm going to cover quite a few areas. Lisa, I just want to confirm you can see my PowerPoint presentation.
Yes, we can, John. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Now, colleagues, you'll see if we have time on the top left, I've put together a little bot that I'm going to demonstrate to you specifically for the Construction and Engineering Association, just to show you how important it is to use technology to move away from transactional issues. So do remind me to get back to that. But colleagues, today we're going to look at the CEA type environment. We're going to cover labor reform, artificial intelligence, and workforce strategy. So really three dimensions that we're going to be looking at. And my challenge to you today is to identify at least one takeaway that you believe can be applied in your particular context. So I'm going to start off very, very rapidly by talking about 2030. So colleagues, this is the time to be predictive. We keep listening about predictive analytics and the need to envision the future. because if we don't do that, we'll be stuck in our outdated ways and practices. So there's no better reference for me than the World Economic Forum. Now, I'm going to take you through a few slides just to create a bit of discomfort in your minds and to set the scene for 2030. Now, this research is done globally, and it takes a look specifically at what 2030 will look like globally, and of course, South Africa being part of that environment. Now, if we look at macro trends, if you look at the response from leaders in politics, leaders in business, leaders, in subject matter expertise, digital access, of course, is broadening. Costs of living and inflation growing significantly. We going to have very tough negotiations this year where there are wage negotiations. We see Eskom settling, I think, at 7%, but CPI running at about 3.5%. National minimum wage on the 1st of March increasing by 5%. So we can no longer afford above inflationary increases without driving cost cutting in other areas. And of course, that's where the automation, mechanization, and new technologies come in for organizations who are looking for alternative sustainability drives. Of course, reducing carbon emissions is a big area for the construction and engineering industry, and you need to make sure your client base includes clients that are well established, or your company needs to focus on that. Of course, an increase on labor and social issues. You will know that there's a massive labor law review going through Parliament across 5 of our laws, and I'm going to touch on that and the impact that you can expect that to have towards the end of the year when government will probably publish those amendments to those 5 pieces of statute. Of course, we've got an aging workforce. Aging workforces come along with sometimes inflexible mindsets. One of the big challenges, of course, is for leaders to embrace change, leaders to embrace the opportunity to integrate artificial intelligence and new operating models in their organizations. So those are the big ticket items, the macro trends that we're looking at. And then, of course, if you look at the bottom here, just increasing regulation. I was just looking this morning at the Consumer Protection Act, and if you're in direct marketing, a huge regulatory change for organizations. We've got POPI, we've got cyber crimes, we've got all these legislative changes. The COIDA Act has been amended recently with reintegration, rehabilitation, and return to work obligations. Parental leave now being extended to all types of parental leave. So the truth of the matter, colleagues, is, for me, there are 3 key aspects. The first thing is your business has to be desirable to the user. The second one is it has to be feasible. In other words, you need to use technologies and operating models and be ahead of the curve. And then the third one is it must be viable. Now, when we look at technology in 2030, this is what the World Economic Forum say that will be the key business transformative areas. So in other words, by 2030, AI and information processing technologies would have grown by 86%. 86% of employers say that that is their number one focus and priority, AI and information processing technologies. Robotics and autonomous systems from human resources systems, for example, chairing disciplinary inquiries, recruitment, and the like, right through to autonomous vehicles, robots, etc. Now I call them cobots, where we work alongside our robots. Energy generation, storage and distribution, new materials and composites, and we just see the motor component and the motor manufacturing industry working a lot in the context of electric vehicles and the new materials and composites that accompany that. And then, of course, quantum and encryption and various other technologies. So it's all about using technology to make sustainable businesses, innovative businesses, but along with that comes a huge amount of change in culture and a change in the skill sets of organizations. For me, the biggest problem is not technology. The biggest challenge is the culture that underpins the need for change. and resistance to change. That's the biggest challenge we face. If we look at the World Economic Forum graph in terms of the demand for generative AI skills, and I'm going to do an exercise with you in a moment, but look at the demand for generative AI skills from January 2023. You see, colleagues, this is the demand for skills that is in the space of generative AI. Of course, we've got different types of AI. We've got deterministic, probabilistic, agentic, and all these types of AI, but it's becoming increasingly broader in its scope of automation. Yesterday, my daughter, who works a lot in building robots and automation, she said to me last night, Dad, I've spent literally 90% of my day on an artificial intelligence platform designing and automating processes. That's literally what we are busy with. For me personally, I'm spending at least half, if not more than half my day on artificial intelligence underpinned initiatives. Now, this is a critical transition that we're looking at on the screen. The World Economic Forum look at the left-hand side, and they say that the number of jobs that will be destroyed are represented by this little square. Each little square that is lilac represents 1 million jobs. So if you look at the far left, you're going to see around 92 million jobs will be destroyed. Pretty much. Those are your cashiers, your clerical jobs, your bank tellers, your data capturers, repetitive tasks. Those particular jobs are going to be destroyed. And then on the far right, you have 170 million jobs that will be created. And these jobs that will be created, colleagues, are going to be jobs that some of them haven't even yet been identified. They haven't even been realized yet. They're going to have different job titles, totally new types of jobs emerging. So the good news is that it seems, according to the WEF, that organizations that are proactive in countries that can harness this will have a net growth in jobs. I must say I'm a bit less optimistic. I think there's going to be net job destruction, especially in countries like South Africa, where we've got very, very poor skill sets coming out of university, coming out of the CETA system and out of schools. And of course, in South Africa, we've got very rigorous labor laws. Now, you might say, John, what about these sort of light blue jobs in the middle? Now, that is where you're going to keep your job, but the content will change fundamentally. 40, 50, or 60% of your content as an HR manager or as an engineer or as a designer will change. So the job will remain, but how you get that job done will change fundamentally. And what I'm worried about is I don't believe organizations are busy doing predictive analysis sufficiently to say, what are the skill sets? What will my organizational design look like by 2030 and start moving in that direction? That will result in massive disruption, retrenchments, and companies liquidating and really just being casualties of change. If we look at some of the top growing jobs, the fastest growing jobs, of course, big data specialists, fintech engineers, no surprise, AI and machine learning specialists. I've just enrolled the head of our AI division in a course with Stellenbosch. It's a year-long course teaching them to not only, of course, optimize and to build AI bots and machine learning, but also to code in Python and various other languages. But I mean, it comes at 120,000 Rand cost to put our head of AI through that particular program. Software engineers, security, of course, massive issue with POPI, cybercrimes, etc. And then these are the jobs: autonomous and electric vehicle specialists, light truck delivery services, user experience designers, data analysts, etc. Jobs that are declining, well, postal service clerks, bank tellers, data entry clerks, administrative assistants, executive secretaries are always have a bit of a chuckle when I see senior people in organizations still with executive secretaries, colleagues. I've got to question whether that is still required, but that's a discussion for another day. For our financial people, accounting, bookkeeping, and payroll clerks, uh, challenging. Those jobs are declining very quickly. Even there, look at the bottom, legal officials, so attorneys and even consultants to some extent, legal secretaries. I mean, we've got access to technologies that literally decimates these particular jobs. Um, so we need to be very aware that in the next 5 years, on average, the human share of work will decrease and the automation component will increase. In this case, they estimate by 81.5%. So if you look at the use of the proportion of human performed tasks now versus human performed tasks doing the same jobs by 2030, there'll be an 81% increase in automation. We need to say, how do we deal with this? Because we don't want to destroy employment, but we need to redeploy and we need to be productive in redeploying people to focus on areas that robots can't do. Robots can't lead. Robots don't have that human connection. So we need to redirect. Robots, are really fundamentally dependent on us to give them direction, although they are becoming incredibly intuitive. Now, when we come to construction and engineering, and of course manufacturing, you can see the percentage of jobs done by automation. By automation, if you look at advanced manufacturing, you can see that the number of jobs done by done by robots will increase from 31 to 43%. So if you look at energy, technology, and utilities, a huge increase in automation and new technologies from 32 to 43%. Infrastructure and building, 36 to 51%. So these are massive increases in the shift of the human share of work into automation. And colleagues, we can't just put our heads in the sand and ignore this. We need to say, how does this affect our strategy, our operating model? How does this affect the skill sets? What do we outsource? What do we subcontract? Where do we use temporary employment services, etc., etc.? So if we look at the top 10 AI and skills disruption trends for construction and engineering, the first trend, and I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but of course, if we look at the technology frontier in AI, robotics, and digital fluency, if we look specifically at construction and engineering, we see AI is the dominant technology. AI and information processing is expected to transform 86% of employers by 2030. That's massive, colleagues, and I'm going to illustrate this to you in a minute. So AI co-pilots, predictive analytics, intelligent automation, these are all aspects, design, planning, and site management. We need to move to piloting these particular ideas, testing them, the prototypes, and then moving forward. Then, of course, robotics. I estimate to transform 58% of employers through selective automation of hazardous tasks, repetitive tasks, things like surveying of sites, structural inspection, and materials handling. This will reduce risk, improve productivity, and of course, cut costs, making you more competitive. The third big trend, digital and data fluency. Colleagues, big data, cybersecurity are the fastest growing skills clusters. Now, BIM, building information modeling, is a massive growth area where you are able to generate and manage digital representations of the physical and functional characteristics of buildings and infrastructure and utilities, and civils. So you've got technology and that is now able to rapidly become the baseline capability that replaces a huge labor component and a skills component, which is also lagging. Some of the other big disruptors in the construction and engineering context, of course, massive skills churn. We estimate 39% of core skills will change or become an obstacle or obsolete by 2030. The net growth in jobs with high churn. In our research, we find that 22% of all jobs will be displaced, 14% newly created jobs, and then 8% of other jobs displaced. So we have an obligation towards our staff and towards our shareholders to ensure that we are sustainable and do not become casualties of change because our systems, our skills, our organizational design, and our use of technology is obsolete. And then, of course, clerical work is going to be the fastest declining occupations in your sector and industry. So human skills are premium, colleagues. You need to upgrade your people skills. You need to ensure that your technical, your emotional intelligence skills, your analytical skills, your digital intelligence is on track. So I'd like to ask you to reflect on your workplace skills plan for the next 12 months. If we take a look at these particular disruptors and these demands for skills, what are you doing in your organization to ensure that your skills are up to date, that your organization design is fit for purpose, that you're cost effective and innovative? Because if you're not, colleagues, you're going to find yourself becoming a casualty of change. And of course, we often talk about characteristic cases and case studies. Of course, Netflix, we see Pick and Pay struggling versus in relative to ShopRite Checkers. We see the cinemas taking strain because of the likes of Netflix. Chinese vehicles, 60% of all new vehicles sold Chinese vehicles. These are stories that are told, and they didn't happen overnight, colleagues. Leaders really need to envision the future, and they need to act on that. So the strategic response, my recommendation in your environment in terms of the strategic response is to ensure that you reskill one of the key areas. 59% of workers need reskilling or upskilling to remain effective in their jobs. You need to prioritize this. You need to look at internal redeployments and moving people to areas of high value. You can't keep adding costs and staff all the time. Every time your payroll gets bigger, every time your headcount gets bigger, you are effectively being punished because labor law and costs around labor law is always a percentage of payroll, like UIF, workman's comp, SDL, skill spend, learnerships, people with disabilities. Everything is a percentage of payroll and everything is a percentage of headcount. So if you're growing your headcount continuously, rather than using TES, rather than outsourcing, rather than automation, you will become uncompetitive purely off the back of labor costs and liabilities in that area. So the big change with this and the adoption of artificial intelligence and process automation, as I said, is not the fact that you don't have access to this technology, but it's very much a factor of the left-hand side of this change curve. Because when it comes to artificial intelligence, this left-hand side is where the emotions manifest, and in different ways. And we don't have time today to unpack all of this, but many organizations we come across are so scared that artificial intelligence is going to breach their IP, breach their confidentiality of their data subjects. It's going to become a poppy issue. But colleagues, that fear must be managed. It will never be a perfect environment for you. So if you're waiting for the perfect system, the perfect AI platform, you're never going to get out the starting blocks. I heard a story the other day where an attorney was on his way to the CCMA and he had a bundle of documents in the back seat of his car, preparing for the arbitration. But he stopped at a one-stop on his way, and literally in a matter of 2 minutes while he was in the one-stop, his remote was jammed and they stole his briefcase with this bundle of documents, hard copy documents in. Colleagues, that's a massive data breach with about 40 people's data subjects being leaked. I don't understand why there's this disproportionate concern about AI and data breaches. If you have a proper POPI impact assessment process, if you've got staff that are trained, and if you use enterprise grade artificial intelligence, I can guarantee you, colleagues, that you will be able to manage that risk effectively. The other problem on the left-hand side is people are concerned about being displaced. They don't want to learn new skills. I was reading an article the other day that said when you learn new skills, it takes a 25% extra mental effort to acquire new skills because you've got to have new neural links and neural pathways that develop in your mind. So this is not an environment for comfort. This is an environment to build character. And we need to instill that culture in our organizations because once you show the case for AI, automation, etc., then the acceptance can take place. We can start exploring, we can start making decisions on how we're going to approach this and integrate it into our business. Now, with that in mind, colleagues, I'm just going to apologize if you give me literally 3 minutes. I'm just going to stop my feed. I just want to get my earpiece sorted out. Give me a second, please. I'll be with you in a minute. My apologies, colleagues. Lisa, can I just confirm you can hear me?
Yes, John, we can hear you clearly. Thanks.
Sorry, it's one of the challenges of aging. My
It seems like we've lost John. I think he will join us just now again.
There we go. I'm back.
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your screen.
Thank you very much. So, colleagues, my apologies. My little hearing device is battery bombed out. So, colleagues, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use listed business. So there's nothing confidential about this. And I want to give you a sense of how I would approach potentially looking at 2030 and how, as an organization, we can start envisioning the future and see how we can potentially be proactive in reskilling, looking at which processes we can automate and the like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Stefanuti stocks as an example. And the reason I'm going to use them is, as I say, they're a listed business, and their information is in the public domain, and they are an amazing business. They're a client of mine, and I want to just use that. So what I'm going to do is I have actually downloaded the Stefanuti Stocks Integrated Annual Report from their website. So here's an organization. We're now in May 2026. I take their integrated annual report as a listed business. They've got to obviously publish that integrated annual report, and it covers everything regarding business. All their strategies, their challenges, their capitals, their what it is they envisage going forward, their risks and the like. So I'm going to say to my AI platform, please analyze the attached integrated annual report and set out succinct top 7 business strategies of Stefanuti as it stands, as well as how these may change by 2030. Please insert into a table. You can use the attached World Economic Forum 2030 research report to assist. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at this organization, and I'm uploading the integrated annual report, and I'm uploading the World Economic Forum Jobs of the Future report, and I'm saying, give me the top 7 strategies of this organization. But not only as it stands now in 2026, but what will these look like by 2030? Okay, what will these look like by 2030? So you should be able to see my platform doing the thinking and the heavy lifting here, because what am I doing as a leader? As a leader, I've got to take care of my staff. I've got to take care of my business. I've got to envision the future. I've got to become comfortable with not knowing everything and not being able to control everything. But I do want to create some form of certainty and a structure to develop my business over the next 5 years. So there we go. There are the top 7 business strategies. Okay. So strategy number 1, operational efficiency and restructuring. So there's a restructuring plan, short-term focus, lender agreements, etc. Contract revenue grew by 8%, operating profit, etc. That's the current position. What is the projected evolution in this space by 2030? Well, restructuring will conclude and will shift focus from financial stabilization to sustained margin improvement. Greater automation of site processes and AI-assisted project management will be central to sustaining margins. 86% of employers will adopt AI technologies. Then we go to renewables. So it says here, Stefanuti stock should be actively pursuing civil and electrical balance of plant, solar, etc., etc. So it's solar, green energy, and then look at 2030. This becomes dominant as a growth engine for Stefanuti because climate change mitigation is the 3rd most transformative global trend. So Stefanuti need to ensure that they are ready in terms of their skills and their propositions to meet the demand for renewable energy engineers and construction and capabilities. This will deepen its engineering, procurement, and construction capability across the green energy. So now you can see already where these mega trends are taking place, right? Digitalization and technology integration. There we go. BIM, I referred to that earlier. Drone monitoring, telemetry sensors, AI assisted data analytics. Now, you see, colleagues, this is exactly what I was talking about. And by 2030, full digital integration will become a competitiveness necessity. The World Economic Forum identifies broadening digital access as the most transformative trend, with 60% of employers expecting it to reshape the industry. So the infrastructure sector anticipates big data specialists and organizational development roles, and Stefanuti will need to invest in AI-driven project monitoring, predictive maintenance, and digital twin capabilities. So I'm not going to, go through all of these, but you can see, colleagues, the depth and the quality of information. I mean, look at health and safety, 0 fatalities in 2025 financial year. And of course, we need to ensure environmental stewardship. We need to ensure that high risk jobs are potentially automated, et cetera, et cetera. So, how's that for a quick analysis? Now, what I want to do is I want to go and I want to say if I had to put together the performance matrix of the CEO for the next 12 months, right? I would say please draft a KPA and KPI table for the CEO of Stefanuti Stocks with specific metrics. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're now going into the world of, let's call it human resources, and we are now wanting to put together, the key performance areas and key performance indicators for the CEO, because everyone else's KPIs and KPIs will be cascaded downward from there. So now what happens is we take a look at this, and here we have the CEO. There we go, Russell Crawford, Stefanuti Stocks. If I was to give the CEO, which clearly I'm not going to, it could be very career limiting, but if I had to look at the CEO of this company, there's the KPI, operating profit margin. There's the threshold, there's the stretch target, and there's the actual. And it should be 25% of the short-term incentive. Return on equity, restructuring execution of restructuring plan, debt reduction. That's just KPA 1, financial performance. KPA 2, revenue growth. And there we go. It gives you where it was in 2025 and, what revenue forecasts and growth there could be. Operational excellence and project execution. KPA 4, health and safety. KPA 5, transformation, BE, and employment equity. So there you go, colleagues. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, right, what about the HR director? Because we must now cascade this down to the HR director. And I'm privileged to know the HR director very, very well. He's a good friend of mine, a good colleague. So I'm going to say now, using these CEO KPAs and KPIs, draft a KPA and KPI table for the HR director in support of the CEOs. Right, so now we go into the HR director space, and we now have a potential framework for the HR director in terms of his KPAs and KPIs in support of the CEO's particular requirements. So there we go. There's Mike Sikakane. He's the head of HR, the HR director. He's been there for many, many years. And there we go. We say, Mike, here's your workforce capacity planning and cost management. Labor cost percentage of contract revenue. Just look at these indicators and these metrics. Headcount alignment to order book. Of course, it's very cyclical. So there's a huge component of flexible staff. Payroll accuracy, overtime cost management, of course, a big issue. Talent acquisition. So, colleagues, there we go. And of course, Mike can now use this to go to his head of IR, etc. Now, I see on the call, of course, we've got a number of temporary employment service providers. So let's say I'm now TES. So I'm a CEO of a TES, maybe in Vanderbijl Park, and I want to now go to Mike Sikakane at Stefanuti Stocks and say to Mike, listen, this is what you should be thinking of in terms of workforce design, right? So now I'm going to say you are a staffing and workforce solutions expert and cover models like recruitment process outsourcing, temporary employment service, subcontracting, and outsourcing, uh, gig work, etc. You want to draft a staffing proposition to Mike, the head of head of HR. Draft a succinct table setting out a proposal to Mike on the various staffing models. So you can imagine now you are being very client-centric, you're being user-centric. So you don't arrive at Stefanuti Stocks as a TS or staffing service provider and say, this is how good we are. We've been around for 30 years. We're the best. You know, we legally compliant. We're better than other temporary employment services. No. You start off and you say, we've done an in-depth assessment of your organization, not only now, also over the next 3 to 5 years, and we would propose the following to you based on our understanding of your business. So there we go. So if I was going to do a proposal, I would then say, Mike, recruitment process outsourcing, you really have to outsource the donkey work to me. I need to do your projections. I need to get a talent pool together. I want to reduce your cost per hire by 20 to 40%. Okay, there's an example. The temporary employment services, and it talks about peak project ramp ups, best sites, renewable energy, blah blah blah. When your workforce grew, so you're going to go to Mike and say, Mike, your workforce grew by almost 1,000 people in a year. Is that really the way you want to go? Here's some ideas. Subcontracting. How can you provide a niche service for capabilities outside of Stefanuti's core scope? Vendor management systems, and then outsourcing, business process function outsourcing, managed scope of work, gig on demand, employer of record, of course, is a big growing workforce model. So there we go. There's a recommendation. And now you can ask this robot to put it into a detailed proposal for that particular organization. So, colleagues, I hope that is, an indicator and just an example of what I've been talking about. It's an example of these types of World Economic Forum findings where you suddenly see some jobs becoming obsolete and other jobs emerging, and then the skill sets required changing and the operating models changing. So how exciting is that? A wonderful, wonderful opportunity. We now move to the third part and the final part of today's session, before we maybe just take a look at that little robot that we built just to show you, you know, for the construction and engineering framework, how easy it is to do this and cost effective. But I want to end off today's session talking about the labour law reforms in the context of construction and engineering. Now, as you will know, there are 5 laws going through the parliamentary process based on the outcome of NEDLAC negotiations over the last 3 years. So these amendments are to 5 laws: the LRA, the BCA, the Employment Equity Act, and the National Minimum Wage Act, and the UIF Act. Now, as I said earlier, we're just busy coming through and coming out of, we're just busy coming through and coming out of the, the amendments to the Employment Equity Act. So you've now got 5-year plans. You've got the COIDA amendments with massive obligations on rehabilitation, reintegration, and return to work. So we've got all of these laws that
Apologies. We have lost John. I'm sure he's going to log in just now.
My apologies. So we've got all these laws that are being amended. So how do we respond in terms of these labour law amendments? So colleagues, what we are going to find, first of all, is on the top left quadrant, increased severance and benefits costs. The truth of the matter, colleagues, is the proposal is that severance pay be increased from 1 week per completed year service to 2 weeks per completed year service. And then in terms of benefits, we have this parental leave extension to adoptive parents, commissioning surrogate parents, and non-child-bearing parents. So in many instances where companies are paying and have traditionally paid for maternity leave, they're now facing increased benefits costs as well. Then on the top right, you've got high cost pressure and high risk. What we're going to see when I show you now is there are a number of amendments to the definition of employee in these laws that are making their way through Parliament. And of course, there's a significant risk in terms of the new forms of work like Uber, Take a Lot, Checker 60, and independent contracting arrangements. Then on the bottom right, increasing regulatory exposure through the COIDA amendments, as I said. If someone's injured at work, you've got a massive, massive rehabilitation, reintegration, and return to work obligation. You've got the earnings threshold that increased now on the 1st of May to 269,600 Rand per annum. So your overtime, night work, and Sunday work, etc., allowances, the thresholds now increased, and you've got to manage overtime very carefully. The national minimum wage increasing, as we know, on the 1st of March. And then you've got the CCMA, the amendments to dispute resolution with matters like harassment will no longer go to the labour court, but go to arbitration at the CCMA. And you could potentially lose your compliance certificate on employment equity. And then on the bottom left, you've got your operational challenges. Now, one of the big changes coming through in this labour law reform is what they call on-call or zero-hour workers. And I'm going to take you through that. But if you do need flexibility, which is very much so in the construction and engineering space, you're going to have to use suppliers and systems and processes where you've got very good systems to manage the shifting and the scheduling of these on-call workers. Because if you don't manage that properly, there's certain penalties that can be levied against you. So let's take a look at some of these big amendments that are going to come through probably Q4 of this year. I've just taken 9 of the amendments and what they would mean in your environment in construction and engineering. So the first one is the on-call and zero-hour workers. Colleagues, this refers to where you've got a contract with a worker, normally a fixed-term contract, and you don't guarantee them a minimum number of hours or days. You say that some days you're going to work full day, other days part of the day, and some days you might not work at all. Now, if that is an arrangement that you have, what they're going to be requiring you under the BCA amendments to Section 9 is they're going to say, for example, you need to have certain written conditions into that contract, including reasonable notice to come to work. So if I do call on you to attend to work, I've got to give you reasonable notice. And then if I am scheduled and you then cancel that particular job, then if you don't cancel within a particular window period, you're going to pay penalties to that person, sort of an inconvenience penalty. So this is a massive change, and organizations are going to have to start looking at whether or not they should maybe guarantee minimum hours rather than have 0-hour workers. Then we've got the parental leave issue. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but of course we know parental leave 4 months or 4 months and 10 days. Now to the child bearer, the non-child bearer, adoptive and commissioning surrogate parents. Our understanding, if we take a look at what's coming through, is that adoption will probably be for kids under the age of 6, no longer just under the age of 2. They'll limit this to 1 event per annum. And then, of course, if there are 2 employed parents, there'll be a form that has to be signed by both employers so that they don't exceed those particular periods of 4 months and 4 months and 10 days. Severance pay I've already touched on. Of course, not retrospective, but going forward. So severance pay will double, and that's a massive cost. So you can't afford to have an inflexible workforce in this disruptive environment. You need to look at subcontracting and outsourcing, or else you're going to be retrenching continuously, and then you're going to be paying massive amounts of severance pay. The retrenchment process has been simplified so that unions and employees cannot interdict your retrenchment process before they finish. They can only challenge procedural issues at the end of the process as an unfair dismissal. As I said earlier, harassment claims. So currently just sexual harassment for people earning below the threshold goes to arbitration. Once this is promulgated, all forms of harassment, not only sexual, will go to the CCMA for arbitration, irrespective of your earnings threshold. And that's dangerous because you could lose your certificate of compliance, as I said, off the back of that. The definition of employee is being expanded. And if you have independent contracting relationships, you've got to make very sure they're truly independent. Specifically, they're focusing on platform workers. So the typical Uber, Checker 60, Mr. D type arrangement where they pay these last mile delivery and scooter drivers per delivery, that's going to get turned on its head unless they've got a proper managed service provider and independent contractor outsourcing model. Then your benefit funds, unfortunately, some industries and employers have not been paying over pension and provident deductions. We see in the security industry many companies being found to not have paid over provident pension funds. If you don't do that now, it's a criminal offense, and also massive penalties and fines attached to that. Under point 8, this is interesting. If you earn above 1.8 million rand a year, you're going to have limited protections. So if you are dismissed unfairly, the CCMA will not be able to reinstate you, and they can only award up to 1.8 million rand in compensation. So even if you earn 6 million rand a year and you're unfairly dismissed, the maximum award against you is 1.8 million. So senior people, high earners, are going to want to contract differently in future. They might want longer notice periods or certain guaranteed payments on termination. And then finally, colleagues, startup businesses less than 50 employees will have exemptions from bargaining councils for the first 2 years if they are a true startup and a brand new business. So this is the truth of the matter is you need to take a look at your workforce design. Just like I've been showing you based on the examples previously, you can't, in this environment where you've got, this transition between jobs that are being destroyed and jobs that are being created, and then everything in between, people's skill sets changing. You've got jobs that are growing in demand, jobs that are declining. So what you need to do is you need to cater for that, and you need to go through change, and you need to look at your business strategy, and you've really, really got to think very hard, colleagues, about your workforce model. Now, the workforce model, effectively, the options at a high level is most organizations will want to be more agile and flexible on the vertical axis, and then horizontally, they want to have lower risk and liability. So organizations that have very high permanent or direct employees are in trouble because it's a payroll issue. And as we said, everything's a percentage of payroll or percentage of headcount. So companies that are growing their permanent headcounts, unless there's a very good reason for it, are heading in the wrong direction. What they should be doing and are doing, the ones that really mean business, is they are now looking at saying, let's get it off our payroll and let's get it into the world of procurement. So in other words, let's get an invoice rather than a payroll that is being run, a payroll cost. So temporary employment services fulfill a very, very important job, as we've seen, in terms of various aspects of the workforce model, but intermediating people between jobs in destruction and jobs that are being created. Looking at absenteeism replacements, looking at project-specific staffing solutions, looking at opportunities to assist in flexible costs and also as an entry point for people into the world of work and maybe even into your direct employment for the really good skills that you want to pull in. And then probably the biggest growth area globally now, of course, independent contracting, because as soon as you have a full independent contracting or outsource, your risk, your labor law risk is virtually obliterated. So you're paying there for outputs. There's no joint and several liability. There's no deeming. And this is how I demonstrate it. So if you decide to employ people directly, only directly, guess what? All these laws, LRA, BCA, equity skills, bargaining councils, all of these things are your liability. If you use a temporary employment service, you now see there's a heat map with a distribution of liability. So in some areas, the TES is liable, and you can see the big red heat map on that. So if you use a TES, you are mitigating your liability significantly from a labor law point of view. The client generally remains liable for health and safety, and then there's a joint and several liability component. And then, of course, if you truly outsource or subcontract legitimately, the outsource provider picks up all of these liabilities. Now, colleagues, this is just the labor relations heat map. I haven't even gone into automation, mechanization, new technologies. You need to converge these opportunities into a best in practice proposition. So let's pull this towards a conclusion, and then I'll take a look, Lisa, and see if there are any questions or anyone wants to make a comment. Maybe I'll just show the little bot that we developed for you specifically. But these are the top 10 priority areas that I would believe executives should be focusing on in this industry. And the first one is, given these labor law changes, you need to say, how's this going to impact the way we bid for work, the way we model our projects, So I've given you these options in terms of staffing. Go and take a look at the options and see which of these options are going to give you the best probability of success the highest returns, and the best deliverables. The second one is to segment your workforce and design a very, very fit for purpose model, and then to contract and rewrite your policies. Colleagues, the human resources policies that many organizations have are outdated. And we've got some very important new laws that you need to write policies for, like artificial intelligence. What's your AI policy? What's your AI heat map? On-call workers, once the new laws have been promulgated, parental leave, harassment, probation, high earner remedies, contractor definitions. Legacy documents are outdated. They need to be reviewed. And then, of course, you need to ensure that whoever you partner with under point 4, whether you're contracting, subcontracting, using TESs, make sure that they are legitimate, that they're compliant, and that the due diligences are done. Because if you partner with the wrong TES, the wrong contractor, you're really, really going to be in trouble, because you're either going to be vicariously liable or directly legally liable for their delictual acts. Then, of course, the national minimum wage and the benefits issues we touched on. And then AI-enabled human resources and employment relations. You really need to say which aspects can we automate without having to spend wages and salaries on processes that can be very, very easily automated. Harassment, diversity, and culture, I think we all understand. We cannot tolerate toxic work environments, even in construction. Sometimes my clients say, John, we're quite rough and ready in construction. We use vulgar language. We're very direct. We call a spade a spade. I say, well, if someone takes issue with that, you're going to have a problem. So just be careful to ensure that you are human-centric. You can then also use these new entities exempted if they're under 50 employees for 2 years exemption from bargaining councils. That's a very strategic opportunity there for you and using subcontractors in supplier and enterprise development. We need leaders, colleagues. We need leaders who care about their staff, who are innovative, who give safe, psychologically safe environments to people to innovate, to maybe fail and fail fast, but then not to be victimized, but to grow from that. Then, of course, corporate governance and reporting is critically important. So, as Lisa said, in the slide deck that you'll be getting, you're going to have my contact details. You're most welcome to reach out to me. We can help you on any matter regarding AI, staffing, labor law. We're here to help you in that regard. So maybe just as a parting shot, just before I look at the questions, and if there are any questions or comments, I'm going to just show you. I asked my head of AI to build a quick bot last night, and this is a minimum viable proposition, okay? So I'm going to, we could have given it a much better name, like Construct Essay Advisor, but we need to potentially rename our bot. Sorry, I see I've lost my bot here. I was going to bring it back. Maybe it didn't like me because I said I didn't like my bot's name. I'm not sure whether they do have emotions. Apparently they do, some of them. But let me get my bot back. Okay. So there we go. You should be able to see it. We can rename it. Maybe in the chat box you can suggest a very, very appropriate name. But so, for example, what we've done is we've looked at the construction and engineering environment, and we've looked at terms and conditions of employment as best we can. We've given it a knowledge base. So I'm going to ask this bot an example. I'm going to say, what is the wage for a general worker? Let me just leave it at that. Okay. So what is the wage of a general worker? And I know you work in quite a complex sort of environment with main agreements and councils and whatever. So now it's asking me a few questions. I want to know which sector your general worker falls under. Is it civil engineering or building construction, etc., and which region? So I will say civil engineering in KZN. That makes a difference. So there we go. There's the wage rate for general worker, task grade 1. And it gives me the wages, 54 Rand and 6 cents an hour from the 31st, for the rate from the date determined by the minister to the 31st of August this year. There's the current wage rate. A watchman falls under the same task grade, etc., etc. So I might say, you know, how does night work allowance apply, and to whom? And of course, you can use this. So, what it does is it just gives you a general point of reference so that potentially your employees, your labor relations practitioners, your line managers, they can go and access this. Here's how night work applies under the BCCEI. What counts as night work, 9% allowance is payable, etc., etc. So I'm sure you've got many more questions that you'd like to ask, but this is just an example of something we put together literally in half an hour, and we can build outward on this. So maybe in the chat box, let me see in the chat box, Lisa. Let's see what's going on here. I see.
Hi, John. I don't see any questions in the chat box, but the platform is welcome to raise their hands and ask questions directly to you if they want to engage. Guys, this is for free. We don't get to speak to John for free always, so you must use this opportunity. Is there any questions from the floor? Yes, we have one there from Shoal.
Hey, John. My name is Shoal, working for Cummins currently as a labor and talent specialist. Relating back to your discussion around AI, quite curious, how would you position the business on a trajectory to start thinking about developing talent in a way that's going to start tackling the requirements for AI? And particularly, where in your workforce would you start? Would you take like a top-down approach, a bottom-up approach? I'm just curious to hear and sort of, what would be your view in terms of the strategy around that?
Oh, Charles, that's a wonderful question. A really, really good question. And I'm going to give you an example of an approach and how to deal with this. So for me, in terms of AI specifically and skill sets, in respect of that, Charles, I think what's important is to do a predictive exercise. So on the screen, you should be able to see another slideshow. But I took an organization that, for example, in the human resources department, and you can do this for any function. You can do it for marketing and sales, ops, IT, finance. But I took an organization that had, say, 500 employees. In the HR function, or in the HR department, they had 9 FTEs. And what I did, Charles, is I then literally went and I used a methodology where I looked at the current human resources organogram and design, and then I looked at what it should look like 3 years hence. And in my research that I did, similar to what I did live just now with using Stefanuti, what I ended up was this HR department by 2029 should have gone from 9 FTEs, in HR, ER, and payroll to 6 to 7 FTEs. So 1.8 FTEs per 100 at the moment in HR, dropping to 1.2 to 1.4. Currently transaction heavy, manual processing, physical documentation, limited self-service, etc. Obviously going to robotic process automation, strategic advisory. So in the context of that, Charles, I then went and I looked at the current naming conventions, future naming conventions, and then which of these 9 jobs would shift over the next 3 years. So here we see talent acquisition, and as part of your job, I'm saying you should be able to go from 1 FTE to a half FTE because you're going to automate and use AI a lot more effectively. What I then do, Charles, is I look at head of each job in isolation in this mix. So I start with head of HR, and I then take a look at, what are the key priorities. If you look at these 4 bullet points, what are the key new priorities of the head of HR? So predictive dashboards for attrition, succession, always on listening via sentiment analytics surveys, climate surveys, direct sponsorship of HR information systems and AI. So this head of people will become the overall sponsor of building bots and processing and scenario modeling and automation. I do that then for each of the jobs, for each of the 9 jobs in that HR department, and then do a competency assessment. So effectively, Charles, what I then do is I look at the core competencies on the left and then the proficiency. So 1 is a basic knowledge, 2 is a working knowledge, 3 is advanced, and 4 is expert. Now, once I have this competency matrix for my human resources division, I'm then able to go and assess my current, my current skills against the future skills, and especially the ones I've highlighted in red, Charles. You'll see the head of people and culture, HR ops manager, etc. You can see the number 4 for data literacy means expert level knowledge. So your head of HR, your HR ops manager, your talent manager, the 4s here show that digital AI fluency, data literacy, change management, resilience, stress tolerance, they are all at a 4 level. So that will give you sort of a bridge into what needs to be covered. So just in a nutshell, I would go department by department, function by function, and then I would aggregate my information as sharp. And then I would then identify not only the organizational design, in other words, as I said, going from an FTE of 9 to 6 in HR, but also what are the specific competencies that need to be acquired. And what's interesting, and I know I'm flipping through this, I'm making you dizzy probably, but let me show you what I find so interesting here, Charles. If you look at the head of people, the content changes in amber, 40 to 50% change in their content over the next 5 years. 3 years to 2029. Then you look at the HR manager, right? The HR manager, massive change. 60 to 70% change in the content of the HR manager's job over the next 3 years. So you can only imagine the nature and extent of the skills changes. And that's why I really love that World Economic Forum diagram where it says these jobs are becoming obsolete. These are the new jobs, and in between, you better make sure that you bridge those gaps. So, Charles, a long answer to a short question, but I would do that systematically across each function and then start moving towards the new dispensation.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the floor?
It's like Charles, the only brave one here.
I think people were quite surprised by the information that was shared. It's quite overwhelming. So we will share your contact details as well, John, so people can reach out to you if they have more specific questions to their business and operations. So before we wrap up, a massive thank you again, John, for such insightful and engaging session as always. We truly appreciate your the value that you bring, the energy and the practical perspective that you brought to today's discussion as well. And to everyone who attended, thank you for being part of the conversation. Industries that are willing to learn, adapt, and ask difficult questions now are the industries that stay relevant and will grow. We hope today sparked new thinking around workforce planning, AI, your skills development, and the future of the construction and engineering sector. From all of us at the CEA and the TESD, thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay innovative, and we look forward to connecting with you soon again. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you very
Everybody
much.
must have a good day.